Pay the rent or get out. Renee's voice sliced through the living room like a blade. For a moment, I just stood there, holding the envelope I'd brought from the mailbox, feeling the weight of her words echo in the house I built with my own hands. My son, Caleb, stayed silent beside her, eyes fixed on the floor, too afraid to meet mine. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned, walked past them, and stepped outside into the cold Oregon air. The maple trees I planted 30 years ago whispered like old friends who knew the truth. Renee thought she had won, that her shout had driven the old man out once and for all. What she didn't know was that the deed she'd been living under didn't bear her name. 30 minutes later, one phone call would change everything. This time, silence would speak for me. I built that house with my own hands 34 years ago. Every nail, every line of the foundation, every archway that caught the morning light, I designed it not just as a place to live, but as a promise to my wife, Isolde. Back then, we couldn't afford much, but we believed in building something that would outlast us. And for a long time, it did. After she passed, the silence of those rooms was unbearable. Her perfume still lingered in the hallway, and her favorite mug stayed on the kitchen shelf for years. I used to talk to her photo every morning, just to hear the sound of my own voice in the stillness. Then, 3 years ago, my son Caleb called. "Dad, Renee and I need a place for a while. Just until we get back on our feet." He sounded desperate, and I was lonely. I told them to move in. I thought it would be good for me to have family in the house again, laughter echoing off the walls instead of emptiness. For a while, it almost worked. Renee was polite, grateful even. She cooked dinner some nights, asked about old photos on the walls. I mistook courtesy for kindness. Then, little by little, the balance shifted. My furniture started disappearing, just rearranging for space, she'd say. The portraits of Isolde were taken down and replaced with abstract prints she bought online. The heavy oak table I'd built from reclaimed wood was dragged into the garage, replaced by a glass one, better for entertaining. I tried to hold my tongue. I told myself it was just their way of making the place feel modern, that I should be happy someone was keeping the home alive. But the truth is, every change felt like a quiet erasure. Caleb started calling it Renee's house. The first time he said it, something cracked inside me. I laughed it off, but it stayed with me like a splinter under the skin. I noticed how he deferred to her for every decision. "Ask Renee," he'd say. "She's better at this kind of thing." Soon, I became a guest in my own home. They'd host parties without asking me, filling the rooms with people I didn't know. Sometimes I'd retreat to my workshop in the basement just to breathe, surrounded by my old tools and blueprints. Down there, I could almost pretend Isolde was still upstairs, humming while she cooked. I thought about asking them to move out. I even rehearsed the words once or twice. But each time, Caleb would walk in with that tired look, talking about bills, or how the market was terrible, or how, "We're all family, right?" So I kept quiet. I paid for repairs, covered property taxes, mowed the lawn, things they never noticed. They thought the house simply maintained itself. Looking back now, maybe I allowed them too much comfort. Maybe I mistook peace for love. Because in that silence, they began to believe the house was theirs. And that's how betrayal always begins, not with shouting, but with small permissions that slowly erase who you are. It's strange how betrayal never happens all at once. It arrives quietly like dust settling on furniture you no longer notice. That's how it was with Caleb and Renee. They started handling bills for convenience. Renee said online payments were easier for her since she worked in finance. "You don't have to worry about anything, Everett," she told me, flashing that polite smile that always felt rehearsed. "We'll make sure everything's handled." For a while, I believed her. She seemed organized, always walking around with her laptop open, balancing spreadsheets and coffee cups. Caleb followed her lead, like a shadow trailing light he could never catch. But over time, I noticed my name disappearing. On utility bills. On the mailbox label. Even on the Wi-Fi network it changed from Langford home to the Ashfords. I said nothing. It was easier that way. One afternoon, I found a letter from the county assessor addressed to the Ashford household. I stood in the doorway holding that envelope for a long time. My own name, Everett Langford, now invisible in the place I had built, paid for, and maintained. Renee noticed the letter in my hand. "Oh, that's just a clerical thing," she said breezily, snatching it away before I could open it. "Don't worry about it, Dad." Dad. She'd started calling me that only when she wanted to soften the edges of control. I let her, because fighting over words felt beneath me. But every "Dad" carried an echo of condescension. The house changed too. The warmth it once held turned clinical, everything white, metallic, minimal. The kitchen smelled of synthetic candles instead of garlic and thyme. My wife's rocking chair, the one she'd used to read on rainy days, vanished one morning. When I asked about it, Renee shrugged. It didn't fit the aesthetic. I didn't argue. I just went out to the garage that night and found the chair sitting beside a pile of boxes marked "Donate." The seat was cracked. I ran my fingers over the worn wood where Isolde's hands used to rest. That's when I realized I wasn't just losing furniture. I was losing history. Caleb didn't see it or didn't want to. He was busy trying to get his new business off the ground, something in digital marketing that Renee had convinced him to start. They used my study for their office, my dining room for meetings. "You don't mind, right, Dad?" Caleb asked. "We're just trying to get ahead." Of course I minded. But saying so would have made me the villain. So I smiled and told him to go ahead. At night, I'd sit in the small den they hadn't yet redesigned, listening to their laughter echo from the kitchen. They spoke about plans for the property, how they might renovate the guest room, or open up the back wall for more light. They spoke as if I weren't there. Sometimes I wondered what Isolde would have said. She'd been the kind of woman who saw through people quickly, kind but not blind. I imagined her saying, "Everett, you're letting them write over your story." And maybe she was right. I'd traded confrontation for comfort, and in that quiet surrender, I'd handed them the pen. The night before it all came crashing down, I found my wife's old journal tucked behind a row of books. On the last page, she'd written in her looping handwriting, "If they ever forget what this house stands for, remind them who built it." The next morning, I didn't yet know how much I'd need those words. But they'd already begun to stir something in me, a quiet resolve beneath years of silence. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet day when the house felt almost peaceful. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, the smell of coffee drifted through the air, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot how cold the place had become. Renee was standing by the counter, scrolling on her phone, her tone clipped as she spoke to someone from her office. Caleb sat at the table, tapping at his laptop, half listening, half avoiding. I'd gone out early that morning to buy groceries, salmon, fresh herbs, the bottle of white wine that Isolde used to love. I thought maybe, if I cooked something nice, we could all sit together like a family again. Foolish hope, I suppose. When I came back through the front door, Renee barely looked up. "You should have told me you were going out," she said, not even glancing away from her phone. "We were planning to have people over this afternoon. The kitchen's already in use." "People?" I asked, setting the bag on the counter. "I thought Sundays were just for us." She sighed, exaggerated, as if I were a stubborn child. "Everett, you need to understand this isn't just your space anymore. We all live here. You can't expect to monopolize the kitchen whenever you feel like it." Something inside me shifted, slow and heavy. I looked at my son. Caleb didn't meet my eyes. "Is that how you feel too?" I asked. He hesitated. Renee just means we're all sharing the house now. We have to make it fair. Fair. That word again. The same one I'd heard when they first started paying half the bills. When they took over my study. When they removed Isolde's chair. Fair. I nodded slowly, unpacking the groceries anyway. I bought the good salmon. Figured we could grill it tonight. Renee gave a dry laugh. You really don't listen, do you? We already have dinner plans. That's when she snapped. You know what, Everett? This isn't working. You're living here rent-free, using the utilities, taking up space, and acting like the house still revolves around you. It doesn't. You need to start paying rent or find somewhere else to go. The words hit like a slap, but I stayed perfectly still. My hands tightened around the grocery bag until the plastic tore. The sound echoed through the kitchen like thunder. Caleb finally looked up, startled. Renee. No, she said sharply. He needs to hear this. We're drowning in expenses, and he doesn't contribute a dime. He thinks nostalgia pays the bills. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked at her, then at my son. His silence said everything. So that's how it is? I asked quietly. After everything, this house, this life, you're charging me rent? It's only fair, Renee repeated, crossing her arms. Fair. I almost smiled. I picked up the torn grocery bag, placed it gently on the counter, and met her eyes. Then I suppose I'd better start looking for another place. She blinked, surprised. Maybe she expected me to beg or plead. But I didn't. I walked past them, toward the front door. Caleb called after me, but I didn't turn back. Outside, the autumn wind carried a chill that bit through my jacket. The maple leaves rustled overhead, whispering something only I could hear remind them who built it. And for the first time in years, I felt calm. Not defeated, not broken, just calm. Because deep down, I already knew, I wouldn't need to look for another place. They would. I walked for nearly an hour that afternoon, letting the cool air settle my thoughts. My shoes scraped across the sidewalk, crunching dry leaves as I passed the same rows of houses I'd once helped design for clients decades ago. Funny how the world turns, the builder becomes the exile. I stopped at the cafe across from the courthouse, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window. My reflection stared back from the glass, a man with silver hair, steady hands, and eyes that no longer trembled. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a business card worn soft at the edges. Lawrence Pike, attorney at law. Lawrence and I went back nearly 30 years. He'd handled every legal matter for my firm back when Langford architecture still meant something. When Isolde passed, he was the one who suggested I put the property into a living trust, for protection, he'd said. I hadn't realized at the time how right he was. I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring. Everett. It's been too long. Too long, I agreed. Lawrence, I think it's time we finish that paperwork you told me to keep ready. There was a pause. He understood instantly. You're sure? I've never been more sure. Give me 30 minutes. I hung up and sipped my coffee slowly. 30 minutes, that's all it would take to end years of quiet humiliation. As I waited, I thought about the first time I'd met Renee. Back then, she was all charm, sharp smile, soft voice, and the kind of confidence that could light up a boardroom. I'd admired her. I'd even believed she'd be good for Caleb, a stabilizing force. I mistook ambition for love. But ambition turns cold when it's hungry. At exactly the 30th minute, my phone buzzed. Everett, Lawrence said, his tone all business now. Everything's ready. The trust was never revoked, only dormant. I've reactivated the transfer clause. I can finalize the sale immediately under the trust's authority. Can it be done today? I asked. Today, he confirmed. The Hollister family has been waiting for a property just like yours. They're pre-approved, cash-ready, and willing to close fast if the terms are right. I can push through electronic signatures and escrow before the end of the business day. How long until they take possession? Technically, the trust remains owner until funds are released, which will happen by close of business. The transfer of rights, however, becomes binding the moment you authorize me. It's irreversible. I looked out the window at the fading afternoon light. A mother walked by with her daughter, holding hands, laughing. For a moment, I saw us sold and our son the way they used to be before everything hardened. I tightened my grip on the phone. Do it, I said. Lawrence's voice remained calm. Consider it done. You'll receive the confirmation shortly. And Everett, are you ready for the fallout? I've been ready for years. When I left the cafe, I didn't go home right away. I walked through the park where it sold and I used to sit on Sundays. The benches had been repainted, the fountain replaced, but the air still carried the same faint scent of pine and rain. I sat there until my phone vibrated again, a text from Lawrence. Transfer complete. Escrow secured. Property no longer under your personal ownership. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. In half an hour, everything had changed. By the time I reached the front gate, the sun was setting, painting the sky in bands of gold and amber. I looked up at the house, my house, knowing it wasn't mine anymore, at least not on paper. But for the first time in a long while, that didn't bother me. Inside, the lights were on. I could hear laughter. Renee's laughter. She didn't know it yet, but she was laughing inside someone else's home. And that, I thought, was the most poetic justice of all. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the kind of early hour when the world still feels half asleep. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall, one of the few things Renee hadn't replaced yet. I stood in the doorway of the living room, taking in every corner, every beam of light filtering through the blinds. I'd drawn those lines, those angles. I'd chosen the oak for the flooring, knowing it would darken beautifully with age. Now, it belonged to someone else. Lawrence had sent me a confirmation email at midnight, the official transfer deed, notarized and sealed. The trust had sold the property to Marcus and Adele Hollister for $875,000. The funds were already cleared. Every inch of the house, every brick, every garden stone now bore a new name. The irony was almost sweet. Renee and Caleb still slept upstairs, completely unaware that they were no longer sleeping under their own roof. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen counter, letting the aroma fill the space. My coffee. My machine. My kitchen. Every sound, every smell felt different now, like the echo of something I was already leaving behind. By mid-morning, the first call came. Lawrence's voice was calm, steady. All documents filed, Everett. Escrow is closed. The buyer's attorney will send a courtesy notice later this week, but legally, as of 9:42 a.m., the house belongs to the Hollisters. Thank you, Lawrence. He hesitated. You've done something most people don't have the courage for. Courage, I said softly, or closure. Maybe both. After we hung up, I went outside. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the autumn wind carried the scent of damp earth. I walked around the yard. The rose bushes Isolde had planted were still blooming, stubborn as ever. I knelt down and touched one of the petals. She'd be proud, I whispered. You always said this house had a soul. Now it's free again. At 10:30, a black SUV pulled up in front of the driveway. I recognized the emblem Hollister Realty Group. Two people stepped out, a tall man in a navy coat, and a woman holding a portfolio binder. They waved politely as they approached. Mr. Langford, the man asked, extending his hand. Marcus Hollister. This is my wife, Adele. I know this must feel strange, meeting the new owners so soon, but we wanted to thank you personally. Your attorney told us you built this house yourself. I shook his hand firmly. Every inch. It shows, Marcus said, glancing up at the roofline. The craftsmanship, the proportions. They don't build homes like this anymore. Adele smiled, her eyes soft. We promise to take care of it. We can feel the history here. It's rare to find a place that feels loved. I looked at them, two people who saw the house not as property, but as art. Then it's yours to love now, I said quietly. We spoke for a while. They asked about the materials, the garden layout, the way the light hit the living room at dawn. I answered every question, watching as they admired the very details Renee had dismissed as dated. When they left, they thanked me again and said they'd move in next month. After they drove off, I leaned against the porch railing, watching the SUV disappear down the street. I didn't realize until then how light my chest felt. Inside, I found Renee at the kitchen counter, still in her robe, stirring sugar into her coffee. She didn't even notice I'd been outside talking to strangers. Morning, she said, distracted. We need to talk about the property tax notice. I think it's in your name, right? We'll have to transfer it to ours once we finish that refinance paperwork. I smiled faintly. You might not need to worry about that. She frowned, finally looking up. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, nothing urgent, I said, taking a sip of coffee. Just some ownership adjustments. Her brow creased. Everett, what are you talking about? Don't worry, Renee, I said, setting down my cup. Everything's been handled. All perfectly legal. She didn't press further, not then. But the unease in her eyes told me some small instinct had stirred, like an animal sensing an oncoming storm. That night, I packed quietly a few clothes, my wife's journal, and a photo of her smiling in the garden. The essentials. I placed them carefully in a suitcase, locked it, and slid it under the bed. As I turned off the light, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The same face, the same house, but something fundamental had shifted. The next time the sun rose, the walls around me would no longer be mine. And yet, for the first time in years, I finally felt like I belonged somewhere in my own silence, in my own freedom, in the justice that only truth could build. 2 days passed before the first ripple hit. It came not as shouting, not even as suspicion, but as a casual conversation that cracked the surface of their illusion. I was in the garden trimming the rose bushes when I heard the faint hum of Renee's voice from the open kitchen window. Caleb, the mortgage company said there's no record under our name. Can you call them and fix it? Maybe it's just a mix-up, Caleb replied, his tone unsure. Dad's name is still on some old paperwork, probably. I smiled faintly. Old paperwork. Yes, that's what they'd call it, the kind that defines who actually owns the roof above your head. That evening, while they argued over bills and refinancing plans, I sat quietly in the den reading one of Isolde's old poetry books. I didn't have to raise my voice or explain anything. The truth was already moving on its own, invisible, irreversible. It was the next morning that Mrs. Dahlia Crane, the neighborhood's unofficial news anchor, dropped the first bomb. I was sipping coffee on the porch when she called out from across the fence, Everett. Congratulations. I heard your house finally sold. Renee froze in the doorway, coffee mug halfway to her lips. Sold. Mrs. Crane, oblivious to the shock she'd just unleashed, continued cheerfully, the realtor told my sister. Said a nice family bought it. The Hollisters, I think. Renee's mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the porch steps. She turned to me, face pale. What is she talking about? I looked up slowly from my newspaper. Oh, that. Yes. The sale went through a few days ago. Her voice cracked. You sold the house. I folded the paper, set it aside, and met her eyes. Technically, the trust sold it. I just signed the final authorization. Caleb appeared behind her, still in his pajamas, confusion clouding his face. Dad, what is she talking about? What sale? The one that makes this conversation overdue, I said calmly. As of last week, this property belongs to Marcus and Adele Hollister. They'll be moving in soon. Renee blinked, her expression shifting from disbelief to fury. You're lying. You can't just sell someone else's home. Someone else's home? I repeated softly. Renee, you forget this house was mine. Every nail, every brick, every signature on the deed bore my name. You were guests here, not owners. Caleb stepped forward, voice trembling. You could have told us. I tried telling you, I said evenly. For years, I told you what this house meant. You were too busy making rules about rent and kitchen hours. Renee's composure cracked. This is insane. You can't legally do that. We've invested money here, repairs, renovations. None of which were requested, I interrupted. And even if they were, Lawrence Pike handled the paperwork. Every transaction was by the book. You'll find your names on nothing but a utility bill. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came. The phone rang inside, the sound sharp and cruel in the heavy silence. Caleb went to answer it. Moments later, he reappeared, holding the phone loosely. It's the attorney. Hollister's lawyer. They just wanted to confirm the transition schedule. Renee snatched the phone from him, shouting into the receiver. There must be a mistake. We live here. You can't just evict us. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Even from where I stood, I could hear the measured tone. Ma'am, the property was legally transferred. You were not listed as tenants or owners. You'll receive formal notice soon. You have 30 days to vacate. Renee's face drained of color. She hung up without a word and stared at me like I'd just pulled the ground out from under her feet. You did this to humiliate us, she whispered. No, I said. I did it to end the humiliation. Caleb finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, where will you go? I've already gone, I said simply. You just haven't noticed yet. I walked past them toward the front door, the morning sun spilling across the floorboards I'd laid decades ago. Every step felt lighter, every breath cleaner. Behind me, Renee broke down, her voice trembling with disbelief. You can't just leave us like this. I turned at the doorway. You left me long before this, Renee. You just didn't notice. Then I stepped outside, closed the door gently, and let the house, their illusion, collapse behind me. Inside, they could rage, call lawyers, make excuses. But the truth was already sealed, notarized, and signed in ink thicker than any apology. Justice, I realized, doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it walks out the door in silence and takes the keys with it. I didn't turn my phone on for 2 days. The silence was liberating. No pings, no vibrations, no digital echoes of a house that was no longer mine. I stayed with Eleanor during those first nights after the sale, in her quiet home filled with books and soft music. She didn't ask for details, she just brewed tea, lit a candle, and sat beside me while the weight of everything settled. On the third morning, I finally powered the phone back on. Within seconds, the screen filled with missed calls, 27 from Caleb, 15 from Renee, and 3 voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. I listened to one. It was Renee, her voice raw from shouting. Everett, what the hell did you do? You can't sell this house. This is our home. Call me back immediately or I swear. The message cut off there. I deleted it without replaying. The next voicemail was different. Caleb's voice trembled with something between confusion and fear. Dad, I don't understand. The attorney said everything's legal, that the house was sold weeks ago. Renee's losing it. Please, just talk to me. We can fix this, okay? We're still family. Family. That word didn't sting anymore, it just felt hollow. By afternoon, the calls started again, each one vibrating like a ghost trying to get through a locked door. I ignored them until one came from a new number. Something told me to answer. Dad? It was Caleb. His voice was shaky, quieter than I'd ever heard it. Yes, I said calmly. Please, don't hang up. We're sorry, okay? We didn't mean for things to get so bad. Renee lost her job, and I was drowning in debt. We thought if we took over, maybe we could build something better. By taking what wasn't yours. He hesitated. We didn't mean to push you out. You didn't push me out, I said. You taught me I could leave. He went silent. In the background, I heard Renee sobbing, her voice muffled but sharp. Ask him to fix it. He can cancel it. He owes us that much. I waited. Dad, Caleb said, barely audible, is there really nothing you can do? It's done, son. The papers are signed, the money's cleared, and the new owners will move in next month. I've already found my place. Renee's voice burst through the speaker. How could you? You heartless old man. We'll be homeless because of you. My tone stayed even. You charged me rent in my own home, Renee. You made rules about when I could cook in the kitchen I designed, when I could sit in my own living room. You wanted to be the landlord, now you get to find out what eviction feels like. There was a pause, a sound like someone stifling a sob. Then Caleb whispered, I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. Sorry isn't payment, Caleb. It's acknowledgement. Start there. The line went quiet. Then, before hanging up, I said softly, I hope you find a place that teaches you gratitude. Afterward, I sat in Eleanor's sunlit kitchen, the phone still in my hand. My heart felt both heavy and unburdened. Eleanor slid a cup of coffee toward me. That was them, wasn't it? Yes. Do you regret it? I looked out the window. The garden was alive with color: lavender, hydrangeas, a small stone path that led nowhere but felt like peace. No. I regret that it came to this, but not what I did. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped saving them. That evening, another call came, this time from Renee. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, her voice was smaller. Everett, I don't know what to say. You were right. We treated you like a burden. We thought you'd always be there to fix things. But you're gone, and now everything's falling apart. I don't know how to make it right. Her voice broke. Please, don't hate us. I replayed it once. Then deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but finality. As night settled, I walked with Eleanor down the quiet street, the air cool against my face. You look lighter, she said. I think I am. Justice can be heavy, she added gently. Not when it's earned, I said. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night, no anger, no guilt, just the peace that comes when silence finally means freedom. The weeks that followed were quiet, not the cold, suffocating silence of my old house, but the kind that hums with peace. Eleanor's place sat on a gentle hill at the edge of town, surrounded by trees that whispered when the wind passed through. Mornings smelled of coffee and pine. Evenings glowed with the amber light of the fireplace. I'd rented a small apartment nearby, 2 bedrooms and a balcony that overlooked the river. Simple, clean, mine. The first night I moved in, I stood at the window with a glass of bourbon, watching the city lights reflect off the water. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting my own past. I was simply a man with keys to a door that no one else could open. A week later, I received the official notice that the Hollisters had taken possession of the house. The title was finalized. I didn't drive by to see it. I didn't need to. I'd already said goodbye long before I left the driveway that morning. What I didn't expect was the letter. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, written in my daughter-in-law's careful handwriting. Inside were 2 pages, no accusations this time, no anger. Just words I never thought I'd see. Everett. You were right. We forgot who built that house, and we forgot who made it a home. Caleb and I are moving into a small apartment near downtown. It's nothing fancy, but it's ours. He found a new job. I'm working part-time. We're trying to rebuild, but not just our lives, ourselves. I know we don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope, one day, we earn a chance to see you again without shame. Thank you for the lesson we didn't know we needed. Renee. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as proof that even the hardest walls can crack, and sometimes, through the cracks, light finds its way in. That evening, Eleanor came by with dinner, roasted chicken and red wine. You look like someone who's thinking too much, she said, setting the plates down. Just reflecting, I admitted. They finally understand what they lost. She smiled softly. Understanding doesn't undo what was done, but it's a start. We ate quietly, listening to the faint music from the radio. When the song ended, she asked, "Do you ever miss the house?" I thought about that for a long moment. The way sunlight used to spill through the front windows. The creak of the staircase. The smell of Isolde's baking. But I realized the house I missed no longer existed. It had died long before I sold it. I miss what it used to be, I said. But I don't miss what it became. Eleanor reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. Then you did the right thing. A week later, we visited a small antique store downtown. She'd been talking for months about wanting a piano again. She'd sold hers during the divorce years ago. I found one tucked in the corner, slightly worn but beautiful, with a sound that filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. When the salesman quoted the price, I smiled. We'll take it. Eleanor's eyes widened. Everett, you don't have to. I want to, I said. It's time to fill the silence with music again. When the piano arrived at her house, she played for hours. The melody wound through the air, gentle and alive. I sat on the couch, eyes closed, feeling each note like forgiveness. That night, she turned to me and said, "You know, you've changed. You used to carry anger like a stone. Now it's like you've set it down somewhere." Maybe I finally remembered who I was before they made me forget, I said quietly. A builder. A husband. A father who loved too deeply, maybe, but never wrongly. She smiled. And now? Now, I said, I'm a man who finally learned when to let go. We sat together in the soft light, her fingers still resting on the keys, the sound of rain starting outside. The melody faded, replaced by the rhythm of drops against the window, steady, cleansing, final. For a long time, I believed justice was something you had to shout for. But I learned that real justice can whisper. It doesn't always destroy, sometimes it simply restores balance, one quiet act at a time. I didn't ruin Renee and Caleb's lives. I just stopped allowing them to ruin mine. When I look back now, I don't think of betrayal. I think of release, of the moment I walked away, not in anger, but in peace. Because the truth is, the house was never the victory. Freedom was. And as Eleanor began playing again, her hands graceful, her music filling the room, I realized something simple and beautiful. The sound of forgiveness is not applause or apology. It's music. And I was finally listening.